Alright everybody, how we doing today? So, this is related to the previous story. This is from Ruptly. And it says, excuse me a second. Excuse me, there we go. Economic terrorism. Venezuela accuses U.S. of criminal blockade as it moves to freeze government assets. The U.S. has imposed new restrictions on Venezuela, blocking its government assets and threatening anyone dealing with it with secondary sanctions. The move prompted an angry reaction from Caracas. The sanctions target Venezuela government assets in the U.S. as well as individuals, companies, and countries doing business with Caracas. All property interests and property of the government of Venezuela that are in the United States are blocked and may not be transferred, paid, exported, withdrawn, or otherwise dealt in the executive order signed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Venezuela may decide to regard this as economic terrorism, which could spell trouble not only for our reputation worldwide, but may result in people turning against us once they see what America's doing, and if Venezuela successfully characterizes it in the right way, they may gain sympathy. In which case, we'd be in trouble. The announcement was reinforced by a barrage of threats issued by U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, who said anyone dealing with the President Nicolas Maduro and his government will face secondary sanctions. He singled out Moscow, which has been engaged in economic and military cooperation with Venezuela for a long time. The United States is acting assertively to cut off Maduro financially and accelerate a peaceful, democratic transition, Bolton said. We say again to Russia, and especially to those who control its finances, do not double down on a bad bet. The U.S. will not recognize any elections held in Venezuela as long as Maduro stays in power. Bolton warned, adding that countries, companies, and individuals must choose between doing business with Caracas or Washington. The aggressive move and rhetoric prompted an angry reaction in Caracas, which branded the U.S. actions acts of economic terrorism. Said the U.S. decision is hardly surprising. The new sanctions only formalize a criminal, economic, financial, and commercial blockade that has already started. Venezuela's foreign ministry said it also vowed to not allow the escalation of aggressions to affect political dialogue processes. Now, let's be clear. What is the definition of terrorism? Using violence and fear to promote one's political agenda. And what is America's political agenda? To get what they want, to support Maduro, possibly to get someone friendly to the United States for oil, for cheap oil. Now, are the United States' actions genuinely economic terrorism? Does it create does maximum pressure imply fear, bullying, stressing tactics? Well, of course. Therefore, if you are doing so to get what you want, then it is economic terrorism, in a sense. It's exactly what it is. They're right on this one, for once. But relations between the U.S. and Venezuela have not been smooth for the past 2 decades. But the past few months have seen taking a nosedive earlier this year. The political situation in Venezuela rapidly deteriorated after the leader of the National Assembly, which opposes the Maduro government, Juan Guaido, proclaimed himself interim president of Venezuela. Washington and its allies rushed to recognize the self-styled president as legitimate, but Guaido's repeated attempts to install himself in the presidential palace have failed so far. Russia, China, and many other countries have voiced their support for the elected government and have condemned the attempts to push through the U.S.-backed coup. Now, if I were involved in this situation, what I would do is, instead of asserting that Maduro is illegitimate, try instead to examine his legitimacy. See if the election really was rigged. Really examine how he got into office. Chances are, I'd say there's probably a good chance he got in there legitimately, about as good as illegitimately. The assertion is uncertain. One cannot, One cannot simply assert a state of illegitimacy without showing some sort of precedent as to why it may have happened, or even giving evidence to showing that it could have happened. And for that matter, do we even have any right to demand that a country do what we want, just for our own selfish needs? The answer being no. I believe wholeheartedly at this point that we are engaging in a form of economic terrorism in the case of Venezuela, and even possibly in the case of Iran and North Korea. The establishment of the United States and this administration is engaging in economic terror for our own benefit. We don't care what happens to Venezuela. We just want Juan Guaido in there because he's friendly to us. Because we'll help him, so that means he'll help us. Favor for favor. I love this country, but I hate the way it's run. I absolutely hate the way it's run. I'm really, really starting to have difficulty telling the difference between criminals and politicians. I really feel like they're cut from the same cloth, if you know what I mean. Anyway,